Hey everybody, it's Felisa, and I do have my tea today, excuse me. But it's going to be another entry into murder, mystery, and mayhem. Anyway, I think I became aware of this story because I was doing some research on some other missing persons cases, and I tend to favor charlieproject.org. Shout out to Megan for at least some of the information that I get on missing persons. I find that her website is probably the most comprehensive that I've seen as far as resources and updates and all that kind of thing. So I was researching some other stories and I came across the story of Dorothy Arnold, who seemingly vanished on a crowded New York City street in 1910. And they were never able to resolve this case, and obviously in 2020 there's probably not going to be a resolve, but nevertheless, the case is still open, albeit cold, and I'm sure that the New York City Police or the NYPD will take all leads and anything to get this case moved from cold to closed. So, Dorothy Arnold was born to Francis and Mary, and Francis was a successful perfume importer, which I didn't know that that was a thing. Apparently it was a thing, and I'm assuming, because of different commodities back then, that perfume was one of the ones that was a commodity that was in huge demand. Anyway, Frances managed to make a pretty penny at it, and so Dorothy grew up as a child of means, and so she was able to go to a prestigious girls' school. She went on to Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania, and I'm assuming that she went to college in order to get her MRS degree because that's what most women did back then. She didn't get it, and she wound up graduating in 1905 and coming back home to live with her father. She decided that she wanted to try her hand at writing, but she apparently was not very good at it. And she had submitted some short stories to different publications, and they were all rejected. I don't understand. Well, some of the reports say that her family and friends were kind of teasing her about these rejections, but I can't figure out why. And whatever it was, it hurt Dorothy's feelings, and she became quite embarrassed and affected by it, and asked her father if she could move to an apartment in Greenwich Village to write. Daddy was like, "Are you crazy? You want me to pay for an apartment so you can go off and write? A good writer can write anywhere, honey. You ain't going nowhere." Or something like that, I assume. Anyway, on December the 12th, 1910, Dorothy told her mother that she was going to go to the store to purchase a gown. Her daughter, her sister Marjorie, was having her debutante ball that was upcoming soon. And I'm assuming that debutante balls around those times were probably the picture of high society, and you're coming out, your presentation as a fair maiden to all of the young eligible bachelors, because daddy is not interested in paying for you for the rest of your life, and he sure don't want no spinster children hanging around until he die. At least I assume. Anyway, so Dorothy's mom, Mary, was like, "Oh, goody, I'll go with you." Dorothy was like, "Pump your brakes, Mary. I don't need no assistance. I can go and do this on my own." Mary probably had terrible taste, or she was going to try and tell Dorothy, "That don't look good on you, honey. Your behind is too big," or something like that. So Dorothy went by herself. Now, we do know that she left the house at about 11 a.m. She went to a confectionery. I'm assuming it was a confectionery or a chocolatier or something along those lines. I just feel like that's where hoity-toity society people would go. Like, they just wouldn't go to the CVS just to get a regular Hershey's. Anyway, she bought some chocolate. The clerk said that she bought the chocolate and she put the box in her muff. Her muff. Anyway, so she puts the chocolate in her little fur muff and she goes over to the bookstore. We do know that she made two purchases at the bookstore. She bought two books, and the clerks at both places said that she was fine. There was nothing going on with Dorothy that particular day. She was courteous and polite and paid for her purchases and went on about her life. Her friend Gladys reported seeing her shortly before 2 o'clock. Now I do wonder what the time lapse was, because, and I don't know how long it would have taken her to even get to the stores in the first place. So let me just say that she lived on 79th or 76th Street, and the stores were on 27th Street. Now, if I do simple math, I don't know if you're supposed to do math. Are they in chronological order? I mean, are they numerical order? Do they go from least to tallest and tallest to least in New York City? I have no idea. I probably could have researched that, but I did not. Anyway, but if I do simple math, that's far. That's far, far. But Apparently, she was able to walk this distance, and it was probably common for her to do it. Otherwise, her mother would have been like, "Girl, you walking?" and would have offered to drive her or send a stagecoach or whatever you do in 1910. Anyway, so she comes out of the bookstore. She sees her friend Gladys. They chop it up for a little while, Gladys said, probably having a conversation about the ball that went something like, "Girl, you coming to the ball? You know I'm coming to that ball. What you wearing?" "I have no idea." "Well, what you wearing?" "I don't know. I told mommy I was going to the store to find a dress, but I can't find anything. These hips just will not let me be great." "Girl, forget that. You gonna look good. Be cute." "Okay, boo." Something like that. So she and Gladys have this whole conversation, and at some point, Gladys is like, "Girl, I can't stand here and talk to you all day. My mother is over at the Waldorf waiting on me for lunch." So Gladys leaves. Gladys does say that she sees Dorothy head off towards Central Park. Dorothy turns around and waves, and that's the last that she saw of her. She went off on about her business, and Gladys went off to lunch with her mother. Now, it was early evening before her parents, Dorothy's parents, realized that Dorothy had not come home and she hadn't made it for dinner. And that was not like her. They said that if she were going to be late or if she was not going to make dinner at all, that she would call, and she had not. So now panic is setting in, and their parent or her parents are calling now her friends and, like, "Girl, you seen Dorothy?" "No, I ain't seen her." That kind of thing. Well, that went on the entire evening. And so one of her friends did report that she called her mother, probably after midnight, I think it said, to see if Dorothy had come home because she had been worried all this time. She said that her mother told her that Dorothy had come home. And so when she asked, could she speak to her, she said, "Oh, girl, she got a headache and she went to bed." Now, listen, I don't know about y'all, but that is bizarre. Why would you call all around God's half acre looking for your child? No, she's still missing. And when somebody calls to get an update, you tell them that she came home. Like, that just don't make no sense. And I never could really find anything in the documents or any of the stories to figure out, like, what was Mary thinking? Because if you tell me that, then I'm gonna stop worrying. I'm gonna go to bed when I should be looking for her anyway. Francis did not want to go immediately to either the authorities or to the press. He felt like it was going to be scandalous. He didn't want the social embarrassment. And I still couldn't figure out, like, what social embarrassment? Like, your daughter is missing. Like, your whole kid is nowhere to be found. Even though she wasn't a kid, she was like 25. Still, she's missing. Why wouldn't you go to the police? Why wouldn't you go to the press? Only thing I can think of is, there had to have been something salacious in Dorothy's past or some behavior that she was exhibiting that was causing him to think, "God, I can't let this come out. Let me just keep this quiet." So he hired a investigator, a private investigator, who went looking for her at like the hospitals and the jails and even the morgue and could not find anything. He also went outside of New York and was never able to find anything. So eventually he was like, "Yo, Francis, you need to go to the police because this is not looking good." So eventually he goes to the police, and of course, the police launch an investigation and they pressure him to go to the press because they're like, "We need to get some publicity around this. Like, we only have so many boots on the ground. We need to get her picture out in front of the public. People need to be looking for her. We can't do this in a vacuum." So, against his better judgment and, against his protests, Francis calls a press conference to let the press know, "Hey, y'all, my daughter is missing. We really need your help." This was on January 25th. Now, by this time, Dorothy has been gone well over a month. True to form, the investigators or the reporters start investigating this story. In the midst of investigating this story, they find out that Dorothy had a beau. Her beau's name was George. She and George had spent an entire week together in September, holed up in some hotel. They also found out, I don't know how, but they also found out that Dorothy had pawned like $500 worth of jewelry in order to pay for this rendezvous in this hotel, which somebody needed to have a conversation with Dorothy because this is not the appropriate way to do things. Like, you don't never, never, never pawn your jewelry to spend up later with no man, girl. Are you crazy? Plus, you got money and he was from a wealthy family. That's another conversation. Anyway, so she had pawned this $500 worth of jewelry in order to spend this time with this boy. And to be fair, this was not some random person. Like, she knew him. They had gone to college together. Apparently, they had had some kind of liaison, some dalliance at a college that did not result in a marital offer, because he went back home and so did she. But he was from an extremely wealthy family, and she was from a wealthy family as well. So this pawning of the jewelry just did not make no sense to me, except to say that neither one of them probably had no jobs, and their parents was like, y'all not about to be playing around on our money. Anyway, George, for his part, was, like, reprimanded by Dorothy's father. Dorothy's father was like, if you see him one more time, I'm gonna blow your pinky toe off. Okay, he probably didn't say that, but he was adamant that she not see him again, and so she didn't listen because, as you do, she saw him one more time in November, and then right after that, he left for Italy with his family. Now, Dorothy went missing in December. George left the country in November, so he was not here. But you could not convince Dorothy's family that he did not have something to do with this, probably because they were embarrassed that it came out that she had been with him in this hotel. And you just did not do things like that in the 1900s. It's just not done. So they sent, or the mother, Mary, and the brother, John, sent a telegram to George in Italy, like, where is Dorothy? He was like, yo, I don't know. I have no idea. Y'all said we couldn't see each other. That would be my response. Anyway, so they didn't believe him. They flew to it. They're not flew. They took a boat to Italy and confront him. I don't know why. They decided that they wanted to interrogate this boy, and he's like, why are you even here? I told you I don't know where she is. Well, they didn't believe him, and they, continued to press him, and he's like, look, I told you I don't know where she is. This is my mama. She is not here. So they wind up going back home empty-handed, and they didn't have, like, any more evidence than they had when they actually flew out there. I will say that Dorothy's father had offered $1,000 reward, which was about $27,000 in our money, which was quite sizable. And true to form, it did bring out, like, some hoaxes and some sightings, and they were, like, chasing their tail, trying to figure out what was true and what was not. And eventually, the New York PD decided that Dorothy had just walked away. She had just had enough, and she would come back when she wanted to. Francis said that he thought that his daughter was dead, and he'd always believed that. And as a matter of fact, he said he had two clues. I don't know what these clues would have been. Like, and it's weird to say, I have two clues. Not documents, not items, but I have two clues. Anyway, so apparently he had these two clues that said that Dorothy was abducted and murdered, and while she was in Central Park, and that her body was thrown into the Central Park reservoir. Well, the police was like, dude, that's not even possible. Number one, it was like 21 degrees when Dorothy disappeared, and the reservoir was frozen over. You can't throw nothing in that. It's frozen. But in order to, I won't say humor him, but to appease him, the police did search the park. They found nothing. And in the spring, when the reservoir thawed out, they did drag it, they did search it, and of course, they found nobody. Which was kind of sad, because I think that her father was really hoping for closure, and we still don't know what these two clues were. Anyway, as time went on, there were more and more sightings of Dorothy. Nothing ever panned out. And in February of 1911, her father got a postcard that was signed Dorothy, and it just said, I'm safe. Now, according to all concerned, the handwriting did resemble strongly that of Dorothy. But the father felt like it was a forgery, and he felt like because Dorothy's handwriting sample was published in the newspaper, that someone had copied it and sent this as a hoax, as a cruel joke. Why they would publish her handwriting in the newspaper is just beyond me, and I can't figure out why they would do that. Like, that makes no sense, but whatever. They were never able to prove or disprove that it came from Dorothy, and he never got anything else. There was also a jeweler in San Francisco that swore that Dorothy came into his shop in January and asked for a ring to be engraved, and the date that she asked for it to be engraved was December the 10th, 1910. Well, of course, there's no surveillance cameras back then. Could never prove it, and the lady never came back. But the police felt like that's probably not her, and that's just a very, very, very bad coincidence. Shortly after all of that, the NYPD announced that they were going to stop investigating into her disappearance and, you know, just pretty much said that they thought that she was dead. And this was several days after her disappearance. By this time, the chief was like, there's no evidence. We can't find any clues. Like, there's nothing that we can find that substantiates anything that happened to this woman. And it's been long enough. It had been 75 days at that point where we're not convinced that we're going to find anything. So essentially, they felt like the case had gone cold. And while they promised to continue to investigate leads as they got them, they were not going to continue to actively pursue this case. Now, there were several theories that came out much later. One being that she slipped and hit her head on the ice and developed amnesia. That doesn't seem very plausible to me. But I mean, it's possible. Anything is possible. It doesn't seem plausible because Daddy Dearest paid a nice penny to have this private investigator crawl upside every hospital within, you know, a 3-state radius. So, if she had slipped and fallen somewhere inside of New York, she would have been transported to the hospital, I'm sure, where the investigators would have been able to contact her. And I'm sure that if they had like some Jane Doe that was suffering from amnesia, they would have contacted the authorities. And nobody ever fitting Dorothy's description was ever admitted to any one of the hospitals. So I don't really buy that theory. I mean, she could theoretically be walking around with amnesia, but if she were, somebody would cite her. Like they passed out flyers, they had ads, they had the newspapers all printing stories about her. So it's highly doubtful that she could be, walking around the city and not know who she is and not have somebody spot her and be like, yo, you're Dorothy. So that didn't make sense to me. Then there was another theory that I entertained, and I go back and forth with it. I do go back and forth with it because at times it makes sense, and at times like the timeline just doesn't fit. And that's that she had a secret abortion and died. There were two doctors who were performing these abortions in this clinic that was in a basement in Pennsylvania. Now the tie-in would be that she actually attended Bryn Mawr, and that would have been local to that area. Remember, her boyfriend George lived in Pennsylvania too, so that's local to that area, and he probably would have known about that clinic because, as you do. Anyway, so these two doctors were running this clinic, and one physician said that he overheard the other one confess that Dorothy had died during a procedure and he incinerated her body, which was typical because you were supposed to be doing that, number one, and dead bodies are problematic if you're not supposed to be doing things and you're illegal in whatever service you're providing. You get rid of the evidence. They thought that this might have been what had happened to her, but I kind of find that almost difficult to believe because, okay, let's research the timeline. She left the house at 11 o'clock. She went to go buy chocolates and books. She chatted it up with her friend at 2 o'clock. Like, you would think that if she were going off to do this, like, she would be pressed and she would be on the train or whatever it was to get to Pennsylvania because she needed to get from New York to Pennsylvania. Like, you can't just, what are you hanging around for? Like, you would seem like you would be on a timeline to do that and get to where you need to get to because time is of the essence. So I don't really buy that. And if she were, leaving later, maybe her train was leaving later. Like, why would you leave the house at 11 o'clock to go do? You just gonna go shopping before? Like, that just don't sound normal to me, or like rational to me. Stranger things have happened though, child. I don't know. Then the third thing was there was a convict named Edward that swore that he was paid $250 to dispose of her body. He also claimed that George was in on it. Well, the problem is that George was in Italy and he had an ironclad alibi, and that was just not a thing. That was just not a thing. So they had taken his statement, and when they tried to follow up on it, Edward claimed like he didn't know what they were talking about. I have no idea. Lying. Anyway, the police for their part did follow up on that lead. It didn't pan out, and her father, Dorothy's father, was like, he lying. I don't know what he would have lied for. I mean, That's a strange flex, but whatevs. There have been countless stories about Dorothy over the years and, countless sightings, and, none of them have ever panned out. Um, Dorothy's father spent about $250,000 trying to find out what happened to his daughter. He never believed that she was still alive. He just wanted some closure. And when he died, he left no provision for her in his will, citing that, he didn't think that she was alive. And so there was no need to do that. Her mother, for her part, always hoped and believed that she was alive and continued to search for her until her death in 1921. Or not 1921. She died. I can't remember when she died. At any rate, yeah, I can't remember. Anyway, she when she died after her husband Francis, but she went to her grave believing that Dorothy was still alive. And was very disheartened and probably died brokenhearted. Whatever happened to Dorothy Arnold happened very quickly, and it happened in a way that no one saw it. Now, what I think is probable is Dorothy stopped off somewhere. Maybe she told Gladys that she was going home and she was going through the park. Maybe when she got through the park, she met up with someone, and maybe that person was known to her, and they were like, hey, come on by for drinks or whatever it is that you do in high society in 1910. And she went off with this person and she was never seen again. I think that that's probably the most likely scenario. The last scenario is, and I forgot to say this, I'm sorry, but people thought that she was so despondent and disheartened over her lack of writing success that she died by suicide. I find that difficult to believe, because what would she do with her own body? Like, she would have had to obscure herself in such a way that she was never found. And I just don't think that she was that cunning nor resourceful to be able to do that. That's just my opinion, but I think that, she probably would have done something like that openly, unless she threw herself off a bridge or something like that. But even then, one would think that somebody would see her on a bridge and, be alarmed. This woman would have been dressed, very well due to her status and her wealth at that time. So it would be probably dang near impossible to not notice her. That's just my speculation, but I don't think that death by suicide is probable. Anything is possible, though. At any rate, I do think that she probably met up with someone that she knew that was known to her, maybe an acquaintance, a friend of a friend, and she was lured to her death. And she, didn't realize until it was probably too late that she was in danger. She seemed to be very trusting and very naive, very, starry eyed and 7:05 p.m. Thanks, Siri. She seemed to be very, wide eyed and doe-eyed and things like that, and very trusting, and didn't really know the way of the world. Her father kept her sheltered and, did so for a reason, and perhaps he thought that their money would insulate her and protect her from things that go bump in the night. Whatever the case may be, Dorothy has been missing since 1910, and unfortunately, her case is officially listed as cold. But I'm sure that, like I said, the NYPD would love to be able to move this from cold to resolve. What do y'all think happened to her? If you've read the story, if you've seen any of the articles or any of the presentations, like, what do you think happened? Leave your commentary below. I love to read it and chop it up with y'all. Y'all be easy, and I will talk to y'all later. Bye.